One of the first questions that I'm asked by newer players coming to Final Fantasy XIV is, what is Final Fantasy XIV about? What kind of content can I expect to experience when I'm playing this game? I'm often asked questions like, is this mostly a combat-based game? Is it going to involve things like open world PvP? Is it going to involve things like instance dungeon and instance raid content? Or what other content is available for you to actually play in Final Fantasy XIV? And so that's what the point of this video is just to address what even is in this game and what you can expect to get out of it. If you like this content and you want to help support the channel, any likes and subscribes are incredibly appreciated and go a very long way to helping me. So if someone asked me to describe what Final Fantasy XIV is in 3 words, I would choose toolbox, community, and story. While I could probably go on a massive monologue about each of these words, I'll keep it short. First of all, I chose toolbox because at the core of Final Fantasy XIV is a significantly diverse array of activities that you can do, ranging from housing, minigames, collectibles, high-end raiding, casual raiding, open world grinding, glamour, PvP, role-playing, and so much more. Heck, even in these categories that I listed off, like PvP, we have smaller scale ranked and unranked matches in something called the Feast. We have large, massive open worlds for like 72 players in Frontlines. Then we also have the ability to pilot giant mechas in 48 player massive battlegrounds called Rival Wings. And so each of these has its own massive set of things involved in it. So Final Fantasy XIV gives us a large toolbox of various activities that we can either choose to engage in, or alternatively not. Ultimately, I do know many players that have never touched higher end raiding. They have never entered to Savage or Ultimate content, and they don't want to do it. On the flip side, I do know raiders that have never touched the housing system or crafting system. And some people might be like, but don't they need consumables? Yeah, but the raid lead provides it for them. They get their potions and then they get their food from the raid lead. They don't touch crafting, they don't touch gathering. So ultimately, you get to do what you want when you want. And the when you want is very important because you can join or leave various activities as your interest grows or wanes in them. There's nothing really binding you to have to do anything outside the main story quest. Second of all, community is the second word I chose. Because at the heart of Final Fantasy XIV is a thriving and very welcoming community. The developers themselves have a very long history of interacting with and deeply caring about the player base. Take for instance the fact that Yoshi P during FanFests will wear clothing that will hint at what the next job reveal will be. Or how about for Shadowbringers, when they announced that they were going to release the Hrothgar and Viera races, how the developers actually went out of their way to make sure that they made as many pieces of headgear compatible with these new races, when previously we were told that, hey, these races aren't going to be able to wear headgear. Could you imagine my Hrothgar without these sunglasses in probably 80% of my glamours? Me neither. So it's definitely been something where the developers definitely inject a lot of passion. But further from that, the player base has been long remarked as being one of the most friendly, open, and nurturing player bases in online gaming for years now. And likewise, in all of the different activities that I listed in the toolbox, we have massive communities around each of them. There are multiple different websites dedicated purely to housing, multiple dedicated just to glamour and G-posts. We have multiple just dedicated to roleplay and just being able to interact with other players and be like really getting into the heat of the moment. Fundamentally, Final Fantasy XIV has a very large and very diverse community filled with players of all types, of all backgrounds and interests, and a toolbox that enables them to play how they want to. Thirdly, my last word I chose out of the 3 was story, and I realized that for many players this will not appeal for them. And honestly, as this is a newer player video, I should say you can optionally skip everything in this game that has to do with story. You can skip all cutscenes, you can skip everything else. But for me, when I look at describing Final Fantasy XIV, I instantly think about its exceedingly good story. The writing in this game is some of the best I've ever experienced in any medium, which includes TV. And now I might be at risk of bias when I say that, but if you look back into the history of this channel, I was originally looking at making Anthem content, and then I pivoted right back into Final Fantasy XIV. I'd like to think that when I say this, that it isn't actually reflecting much of a bias, but that I'm actually creating content because I genuinely love this game and its community so much. So if I had to make a parallel between the writing in Shadowbringers and a TV show, generally speaking, I would actually say that it is at the level of Game of Thrones when Game of Thrones was at its peak. It is actually that good. I cannot really captivate without going into spoilers about the peaks and valleys in emotion, the captivating characters, the dialogue, the voice acting, the animations of the characters. It was just so good. But the story isn't just one of just the main story questline, which makes Final Fantasy XIV extremely different from a lot of other games. Everything in this game is woven into this larger narrative tapestry that was built out carefully over the years of development, and the care and the attention to details really does show. For example, I remember the quest to unlock the Dark Knight skill, the Blackest Night. That was honestly some of the best writing I have ever experienced in a video game, and actually made me a fair bit emotional. Even if you never plan to play a tank or never plan to play a Dark Knight, I would actually recommend you check that out. Like YouTube, the Dark Knight questline, it's actually phenomenal. And considering that this is sideline content, I was blown away. But generally speaking, that is like the level of quality of story and narrative that you're going to be getting when you do get into Final Fantasy XIV. But let's bring this back down to reality, because that is all very high level and a new player will generally not be able to really connect with such a broad strokes description. So what is it about? What are the first steps, and what will you actually be doing as a newer player? Final Fantasy XIV is a story-driven MMORPG that will throw you into a main story quest line, and this main story quest line will navigate you from point to point and assist you in exploring the world while introducing you to some of the most fundamental aspects of the game's lore, game's mechanics, and different options of what you can play. It should be said though that the main story quest is a combat-based storyline where you will need to use the class that you chose at character creation to continue onward. However, it is not very long to change that to a different class, however, if the one you chose isn't working out though, so no worries on that. This main story quest will introduce you to dungeons such as the fabled Santasha, take you through the main cities of the game, and make you travel through a host of different zones, really fleshing out your map for you. But if you want the honest truth, this main story quest leading you through zones and introducing you to the lay of the land, the different dungeons and different activities, even does continue in expansions such as Shadowbringers, which is our most recent expansion as of making this video initially. And we were really led through all the different maps, through this incredible world. Of course, we didn't go into every nook and cranny, that's something best left for those specific activities and exploration activities. But still, this main story questline is like the main pipeline. But that might sound like you have to like always do the main story quest to be on top of everything. And I mean, if you want to complete everything, then yeah, you by definition need to complete it. But there have been many times in the past, like I'm thinking even back to Heavensward, there was a point in time where I got into a good enough point where I could start the Relic Weapon quest, and then I didn't touch the main story quest, I think, for probably half a year, and yeah, that means I was pretty far behind when I got back to it. But there's no reason why you have to feel like obligated to keep doing it every single patch. You shouldn't worry too much about falling behind. There are lots of catch-up mechanisms involved, and it's definitely still fairly optional. It's just very useful if you need to get those particular unlocks, or to be exploring the land more on your own. So that's fine and all, but let's talk about how the main story quest quickly breaks off into various other branches. This will not be exhaustive though, of course, because there truly are just that many different activities, but I think that this is a good opportunity to just say the depth and the breadth of just how much activities we have. So off of the main story quest, you're going to be introduced to a host of various NPCs that will introduce you to activities like housing, including gardening, interior and exterior furnishings, crafting and gathering. And for the record, while it's out of scope of this video to go into the depth of these mechanics, like crafting and gathering, these are some of the most detailed systems for crafting and gathering I have ever experienced in a game ever, and I do actually have to recommend this to people who are looking at Final Fantasy XIV that might be interested in that. The crafting and gathering system is super in-depth, super engaging, and it's actually very meaningful. You can make pieces of armor that top-tier raiders desperately want at the start of a patch, where they want to slot it with 5 set of materia. Don't worry, if that doesn't make sense right now, it'll make sense in a future new guide video, don't worry. But this stuff is wanted by raiders, this stuff is wanted by housing enthusiasts, this stuff is wanted by glamour. Really, crafting and gathering is actually a very important pillar in this game. You don't need to do it, but you know what, if you want to do things like make a house, if you want to do things like get into glamour, if you want to do things like high-end raiding, these pillars, these mechanisms are actually really relevant, and that you don't need to do them yourself. But you know what, you will be ultimately interacting with someone who does do them, and so these aren't just offset little systems to the side. But I have totally gone on a tangent with that. But let's talk about raids. And raids involve multiple different tiers of raids that go from story to the extreme trials, which are a little bit more difficult, but definitely still very much within access to people who are just partying out of group, or just looking for other random players to do it with. We have Savage, which is a little bit more difficult than that. It's still more doable, but it is more generally geared towards static completing it. However, I have definitely completed Savage content without a static. It has not been a mandatory requirement, and I know many people who don't have a static for it. And then lastly, we have Ultimate raids, which are the absolute top hardest raids in the game, and where if you even complete them, it is considered an extremely good feat, and that is likewise the most challenging content in the game for raids. Next up, we have Gold Saucer, which is a minigame event area where you can play minigames and earn points, and these points can be used to trade for glamour pieces, various mounts, various housing items, and a whole host of other little items. And I know many people who literally just play this game just to play the Gold Saucer, because when I say minigame area, I think that we have, this is just going to be off the top of my head, so the number's not going to be accurate, but I'm pretty sure that we have something like 30 or something different minigames. And some of them are really in depth too, there's a Lords of Vermilion, which is this minion based game, and it's kind of, I don't even know how to describe it shortly. It's just very in depth, as well as we have card game called the Triple Triad. We definitely have a lot of mini games for that. Then we have free companies, where the management, the free company events, the promotions, the demotions, the ability to run airships for your free company, and yes, airships and submarines now too, from your free company, you can earn very rare items. Some items are only from airships or submarines, and likewise, this is definitely a very well-made system. We have glamour or appearance. We have hunts, which is open world hunting big mobs for definitely a lot of rewards. And actually, hunts is something that generally surprises me, because it actually has such a big community to it. There are massive link shells out there with people that are just dedicated to go for hunts. And so PvP, as I touched on before, can include things like the Feast, a collection of smaller scale duels, Frontlines, which are massive player versus player battles containing 72 players, or Rival Wings, which involves piloting a giant mecha in a 48 player battle, which is pretty wild if I'm being super honest. Then we even have content like specific limited jobs like Blue Mage that give a twist on prior content, which are playing radically different than any other job in the game. And then next up, we have challenge dungeons like Palace of the Dead or Heaven on High, which is kind of like the ultimate raids, where if you can even complete this, then it's considered a achievement in and of itself. And these are, I'm going to be honest, fairly challenging to do. These definitely involve a fair bit of skill, a fair bit of patience, but when you get them done, I think it's really cool content, definitely worth checking out. And a host of other options are in this game. Whenever someone says that, it's like, okay, how many? But things like relic weapon content or instance relic grinds like Eureka, where you can get premium glamours, the list really does go on and on. And so, through my many years of playing Final Fantasy XIV, I genuinely have seen players who have come back and focused very specifically on one or even a few of these different areas. Even going and looking back on my own gameplay, different times I focused on different things. Like during Heaven's Ward, I was extremely into Relic Weapon and Glamour and grinding that out. I was mostly doing normal dungeons. Arf until you barf is a phrase that definitely became very much my Heaven's Ward motto. Even during Stormblood, I was much more focused on things like housing, crafting, gathering, rather than hardcore end raiding. And then if I look at myself right now, I'm mostly just kind of like all over the place, if I'm being super honest. But looking back at other people that I've met, some specifically focus on PvP, others I've met are housing enthusiasts. Some people spend most of their time on Glamour and taking part in so-called G-Pose, a special screenshot feature in Final Fantasy XIV. Ultimately, just taking a moment to enjoy the main story questline and then going into content as you see fit is going to be the best way to enjoy this game. For a lot of these features though, there may be a little bit of additional unlocks to them outside of the main story quest, as each one of these activities is tied back into that main story, which is why my third word that I chose to describe Final Fantasy XIV was story. The lore and the characters do not just begin and end with the main story quest, but are instead baked together with the core pillars of the game. However, following the main story questline should introduce you, at least in part, to most of these, with a few exceptions that might require a little bit of Google foo to find out the particular unlock location, such as if you wanted to play the instance relic content for Stormblood relic weapons and armor, then you'd need to unlock Eureka, content that does diverge off of the main story questline, but actually has a really compelling story in and of itself. So ultimately, the question of what is Final Fantasy XIV? Best put is that it's a sandbox filled with a whole bunch of different toys that you can play with or not play with them at your complete discretion. Are you interested in PvP? Great, go for it. If you're not, then don't worry about it, and that's totally okay. And I'd say that the one thing that players truly cannot dodge, however, is the main storyline of this game, and it's mainly based in combat. So if combat isn't really your thing, you will have to bear with it a little bit, and that's unfortunately just how the story has been crafted. So ultimately, everyone will need to have at least one single Disciple of Magic or Disciple of War class leveled to max level at any time. But just as a reminder, if story really isn't your thing, you can skip every single cutscene in the game and you shouldn't feel obligated to really get invested into the story. I know that some players are really not into that and they're just like, I just want to play the mechanics, thanks. And that's totally fine, and that is totally an option for you. Anyhow, that is all for this video, and I hope that this helped answer some questions or helped set off some fears from newer players. And yeah, I'm wondering, like, what activities are you interested in? Or if you started playing Final Fantasy XIV already, what are your favorite activities? I think that this is definitely something that is super subjective, of course, but always interesting to hear what people actually really enjoy doing. Anyhow, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Take care and have a fantastic day.